Good afternoon, everybody. At this point, we'll ask if we have questions about enrollment or any other questions that you may have brought to mind up to this point.
We do have folks who've been typing and sending a variety of questions in. So I'm just going to ask them kind of in order. If people participate in the registry, does the registry restrict in any way the types of research that they would participate in?
Okay, if they elect to participate in the registry, does it in some way restrict or compromise their ability to participate in another research study? Am I articulating?
I believe so. So I think the question is, yes, if you're participating in the registry, does that in any way limit your opportunity to take part in studies you might find elsewhere?
It should not. Now, there are, for other clinical trials or clinical interventions or research studies, very often there is a limiting criteria that you can only do one study at a time. The registry is not an interventional study, so it does not interfere with your ability to participate in other studies.
And in fact, I would say the participation in the registry, as you have said, is actually a conduit to being able to hear about clinical trials or clinical studies that you might be eligible for. But enrollment in the registry itself does not in any way limit people.
That is exactly right.
Great, thank you. You've talked about privacy of the registry. How secure is the registry? You know, people hear in the popular press a lot about data breaches. Can you just speak to the security of the data?
We've been very careful with how we have constructed the architecture of the database and the access, and it is very secure. We have limitations as to who has the ability to sign into the registry, and there's different levels of privileges that are assigned to that. Our database actually lives in a couple different secure clouds, so we have partitioned our data so that all of the data doesn't live in one place, which is in itself a protection. Each of the storage areas where information is held are high-level secure areas which are HIPAA compliant, and all of our data transmission that takes place between our different components are integrated in such a fashion that it protects the data. We really believe we have taken a great deal of care to protect the data. There is no local copy of the registry sitting on a backup device or a computer. It is all in these secure cloud locations.
Thank you. You had mentioned that people can still participate in the registry if their loved one diagnosed with FTD has passed away. There's a couple of other questions about some of the logistics of the progressive nature of the disease. So if somebody has registered and then becomes unable to maintain their account or passes away, what happens to the account? How is that handled?
Okay, that's a very good question. So when somebody becomes unable to continue with their account, we actually close their account for further data collection. The account doesn't necessarily disappear or go away because we've already collected important data for that person, but that account is frozen, so to speak, at that point in time from any further data collection. And we have different communications with registrants over a timed basis to try to make sure that accounts are active and in use. And if we suspect that an account has gone dormant, we will freeze that account from further participation. But if somebody is proactive and is aware that their loved one can no longer participate, they can also email the registry and ask for the account to be frozen from that point forward.
And the account for the caregiver continues to be active.
And the account for the caregiver can continue to be active beyond that. Yes.
Great, thank you. There's a question about the registry being open to folks right now only in the US and Canada. Can you speak to any plans for it being extended beyond that?
Yes, we do have plans to expand international enrollment. Actually, one of the points of allowing the contact registry to include international enrollment is it allows us to assess where interested parties are so that we can prioritize which countries to try to interact with first to bring into our research registration. But it will be on a country-by-country basis because of differences in research participation regulations. And so it becomes an institutional review board issue. It definitely isn't a matter of our willingness to extend the registry to international participants. It's a regulatory issue.
So people can sign up now for the contact registry, and then, as you say, as country by country, as the research piece would be opened, those folks in the contact registry could be contacted to know for sure that that becomes available.
Exactly.
So there's a couple questions, I think, about how people register, the patient and the caregiver. So can you start, actually, maybe, Diana, by clarifying how does somebody know if the person with FTD is able to participate in the research registry or not?
Okay. Research participation is really the ability to complete the surveys. And so if the individual has the capability to complete the survey with assistance, meaning you can ask them questions and they can indicate their choice, even if someone has to do the computer part on their behalf, they're capable of research participation. If they're able to communicate their answer response, they're able to participate in the research. If they are unable to interact in that capacity, then they can join the contact registry, and their FTD diagnosed caregiver or spouse can actually register in that category as spouse caregiver and have a research account. They will be giving responses from their perspective as a spouse caregiver, but also have the opportunity to give voice or act as an informant for the FTD diagnosed person.
And in the event that the person diagnosed is not able to fill out the surveys and therefore be a participant outright in the research portion of the registry, does that mean that they are not eligible to participate in clinical trials?
No, it does not restrict them from participating in clinical trials. So even the caregiver, spouse caregiver, as informant will be telling us about the FTD diagnosed person, and based on the information that they're providing, we know that there is a potential FTD diagnosed person available to participate in a research study. So the notice would go about an upcoming study to the spouse caregiver, who would then potentially be able to follow up on behalf of their loved one to participate in that study.
And I know, from all the contacts that we have with folks calling the helpline at AFTD, that there's a tremendous desire in our community to be able to participate in studies as they come online. And I just want to really underscore that the whole purpose of the registry is to try to maximize participation for those people who are interested and who are eligible. And so trying to cast the widest net for eligibility in studies is really part of the goal here, because we know that it's really asking a lot of people, and we know that it's challenging to participate. So by, as you had said earlier, I think this is an advocacy tool. People can advocate and be heard in kind of this whole part of our business in ways that was not available before. So it's really exciting in that way. There's a couple other questions. One is, are there brochures of any kind or any kind of literature that people can take to their doctors to display in the waiting room or to give to patients?
Yes, the registry does have brochures, and we do have a handout that's what we call a fact sheet. We will be providing copies of those to quite a number of different clinical sites. Some of our key patient advocacy groups will have copies available as people perhaps request from them as well. But you can also contact the registry if you want to inform us of a doctor's office that you think would be a likely place to put some of our brochures or handouts. you can provide that information to us, and we'll be happy to do that.
Great. You know, we all know that FTD is a clinical diagnosis. Is there a mechanism for follow-up within the registry to record autopsy results if the family obtains them?
That is an excellent question. And we do not currently have a mechanism to accept that information. It is one of the things on our list that we are checking into as far as what capability we would need to add to maintain and protect that information. But at this point, the answer is no, we don't have a repository to handle that type of data.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Some of the questions I think people have, Diana, are pretty individual. So what we've been doing is suggesting that they reach out and contact you directly if they have particular questions about either their efforts to enroll or about how they might do that. And so your email address, can I just ask you to speak that? And then knowing people can find it, of course, on the registry website.
To ask questions regarding the registration, enrollment, any registry-related question, you can direct that to the director email account, which is director@ftdregistry.org. So director@ftdregistry.org. There's no spaces, there's no underscore, and it's not case sensitive. So director@ftdregistry.org.
Great, thank you. So in terms of some of the questions, is it possible for other people, so doctors, researchers, or people from insurance companies, to sign in and access the database?
And the answer to that is no. At this point, we do not have a researcher portal that allows for outside sign-in. Any question or any query regarding the database is actually submitted to us as a request, is evaluated by the Scientific Advisory Board, and then approved by the Management Committee. And then I, as the director, execute a query of the database and provide a subset of de-identified data to the person who requested the information, as long as it met the criteria required by our oversight.
And is the registry starting to get requests for that data? And how close are you in terms of enrollment to be able to respond to some of those requests?
We are getting requests for information from researchers who are interested in planning studies or clinical trials and wanting to know about how many persons available of a particular type may be in the registry. With the current numbers that we have in the registry, we're starting to be able to provide some of that information back in regard to those requests.
And so one of the questions you actually have on your question slide is one that I think people are interested in, which is how will they know about studies that they may be eligible for? You had mentioned the dashboard. Are there other mechanisms that are used to communicate with people who are enrolled in the registry?
One of the primary navigation pages on the registry website is the Find a Study page. We will be listing studies and clinical trials on that page. So that is one of the go-to places to find listings for clinical trials. We will also be putting information in newsletters. As a new study may be announced, we will profile it in a newsletter. And if we have been requested to actively recruit on behalf of a particular study, there's also the potential that a registry participant would receive an email specifically to their email account, which announces a new study and provides contact information on how they would pursue additional information.
Great, thank you. How big of a database is needed to make a difference in FTD research?
That's a very, very good question. What you can look at it perhaps by how many numbers are needed for some of the clinical trials. And at this point, some of the clinical trials are looking to enroll 30 to 50 participants of a specific subtype. So as clinical trials evolve, it's going to require bigger numbers than that. But you can see already if you have a trial that needs recruitment of about 30 individuals, that the registry already, with our current enrollment, has the potential to start making a difference.
That's great. That's actually very exciting to see. I'm going to ask you to go back for a minute to how people do select to sign up, under what category. How would you know if you sign up as a biological relative or a caregiver? Within that one grouping, can you kind of parse the criteria for those different categories?
Truly, it does become confusing, because if somebody is a biological family member but also a caregiver, which category do they pick? I guess the easiest way to decide that is, if you are a biological family member, that's the category that you should select above and beyond the caregiver role. You'll be able to define your relationship to an FTD diagnosed person subsequently. If you're participating in research, you'll be able to tell us more about your family history and if you've been a direct caregiver for somebody with FTD. But it's more important for you to tell us if you are a biological family member than stating up front your caregiver role. So the caregiver role is kind of designated for spouse caregivers who are unrelated biologically to the FTD diagnosed person.
Right, I think so. And again, I think if people know that they can just reach out to you, that don't be deterred from trying the registry because you have a question, because Diana, as the director and the registry manager coming on, would be very happy to help you with that. There's also a question about people who may be in that portion of folks who are already participating in a research study. If they are already participating in a research study, is there a way for that data to then be included somehow in the registry itself?
That's a very good question, because when we designed the registry, we made a specific effort, since we're using de-identified data with the registry, we sought out the other major research groups in FTD to see what method they were using to code their data. And the registry elected to use a global unique identifier system that is consistent with some of the major clinical studies that are already going on in the FTD community. So our unique coded identifier matches what they're using. So we can, in a de-identified manner, link data that's being collected at these clinical sites back to the data that we're collecting with the registry.
And so the artful studies would be an example of that, where the GUID and the de-identified data can be combined, and people can also enter their information directly through the registry. And it also matches then with other projects that an individual institution might be doing, or are there other examples of how that potentially could work moving forward?
As other studies come online, we're kind of promoting that any large study kind of follows suit in their selection of how they're assigning their coded identifier. And so that would expand the ability to connect additional data gathered prospectively across other studies if those future studies use that same GUID identification system.
Great, thank you. And you had one of your slides that had some of the early demographics, showed the breakdown of FTD subtypes. Can you just speak for a minute to the diversity of those subtypes and whether a subtype needs to be known, or if that information changes over time in terms of how people record that in the registry? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Absolutely. And that was a simplification of some of our disease categories, because I collapsed the different subtypes of primary progressive aphasia just to a single category of TPA. That is a simplification as far as what I illustrated. But you will be given in the survey the option to select from the very specific diagnostic categories. And some people don't know. And you pick the closest one that you identify with. And some people have not finished their diagnostic process yet, and that's given as an option. They haven't yet received their diagnosis. And then, yes, over time, people's diagnosis do change, and we will address that as part of the continued interaction with people, essentially asking if people have had a change in diagnosis and if we need to update that part of their registry information. So at this point, I want to indicate to you that your participation truly has the power to make a difference. And we would like you to consider joining the FTD Disorders Registry to tell your story and help us advance the science.
And I thank you for your presentation and for your patience and really clear answers about many of these questions that people have.
Well, thank you very much. I enjoyed visiting about the registry.
So thank you for joining us for this presentation. As always, please let us know if you have any comments or questions.